Where did all the fossils come from?
Flood.
The flood. You're not supposed to have that answer yet, so we're going to... well, here's what an evolutionist says. Why did they all die out? So scientists recognize that fossils, and this actually, let me back up before I read this. If you go on the internet, Ken Ham does these Answers in Genesis, there's a weekly bulletin. Well, I found a website where an evolutionist is kind of debunking some of what he says. And this is taken from that site. This is the evolutionist's words. I'm not putting these words in his mouth. These are his words, quote unquote, debunking what Ken Ham was saying. So, he says, scientists recognize that fossils can form very quickly indeed. It's pretty much a requirement. Further, most fossil layers containing fish fossils form from the burial of live fish, so they don't have time to float to the surface. I guarantee that if I filled my aquarium with dirt, most of the fish will die and not float to the surface. In slow layers where fish would be expected to float and then sink, fossils are rarely, if ever, found intact. More often you get bits and pieces, most of which are unidentifiable. A tooth here, a rib here, a bit of a skull over here. Another paragraph. Fossil layers with complete fossils are almost invariably catastrophic in some way. If you've got a wide sampling of intact species and trace fossils, then you've got some kind of wide event preserving them. This can be something like a flood for intact animals, not trace fossils so much, a mudslide or a landslide or a layer of volcanic ash. So, my question, this is what we know. Fossils tend to be formed quickly rather than over long periods of time. Since most animals and plants that die get eaten, normal events rarely form intact fossils. Intact fossils are most likely caused by a catastrophic event, like you said, flood, mudslide, volcano, earthquake. Wide sampling. So if we find a wide sampling of intact fossils, that demands a widespread catastrophic event. Further, worldwide sampling of intact fossils demands a worldwide catastrophic event. So, do we know of any widespread event that could have accounted for a multitude of fossils found in similar pattern layers around the whole world? Now here you go, Jack.
It's the deluge.
It's the deluge. It's the flood. Any guesses? It's the flood. It's the flood of that we find in Genesis 6, 7, and 8.
Which probably would have included floods, mudslides, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and more.
Right, and we'll get into that. But probably all of those events would have taken part in the flood. It just wasn't like a really bad thunderstorm that lasted a long time. Question, June?
In the UK, all they ever talk about is the Ice Age.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I know there was no Ice Age, but why do they talk about
Well, we've had many ice ages, like I think in the 600s or something. Like everything covered in ice? I don't know. Probably not. Like they think the Ice Age was responsible for like what Gabe and I were talking about, the 1,000 or 10,000 lakes of Minnesota. They think that as the thing, went down and then retreated, that it formed like stuff like that in the Great Lakes. Probably those can be explained just during the flood. Yeah. And in fact, I just read recently, I think it was Fox News.com or maybe it was Popular Science. One of those two sources where something happened, some volcanic geological thing, and this basin was full of water and emptied quickly. And they said that the canyon that was formed by that happened so much more rapidly than they ever thought possible. And it's making them rethink about how long it might take to form a structure like the Grand Canyon. So, there you go. So, is there any evidence of dinosaurs in our modern age? Is there any evidence? Well, let's just look to our Bible and see what the Bible says about it. It's in there in your notes. Behold now Behemoth. This is God talking to Job and showing that Job is so much weaker than these animals that God created. How much more weaker is Job than God himself? So God is putting his creation on showcase for Job. And he says, Behold now Behemoth, which I made as well as you, He eats grass like an ox. Behold now his strength in his loins and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar.
Elephant.
Yes, elephant. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. Surely the mountains bring him food, and all the beasts of the field play there. Under the lotus plants he lies down, in the covert of the reeds in the marsh. The lotus plants cover him with shade. The willows of the brook surround him. If a river rages, he is not alarmed. He is confident, though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. Can anyone capture him when he is on his watch? With barbs can anyone pierce his nose? And as Jack already talked about, a lot of people will try to explain this animal off as an elephant or a hippopotamus or something like that. The problem is elephants and the hippopotamus don't have tails like cedar. This is what they would look like if they did. And that obviously doesn't look like the elephant that we know. So it's not an elephant or a hippo. Another verse in the Bible, could this be an elephant or a hippo? No. So if we look at Genesis 1:21, the King James Version says, and God created great wells. God created great wells. That word great in other places is translated terrible. And the word wells is translated other places sea monsters or dragons. And I guess we can suppose that the translators back in the King James time didn't think God would create anything terrible or monstrous, and so they just said, well, this must be terrible as in great, and sea monster as in well. So that's what we find there, great wells. The NASB gets a little better. God created great sea monsters, and that's what it says, great sea monsters. And that great word can still be translated as terrible. So I think this is evidence of when God put forth the dinosaurs. And if we look at that word created, we could get a little more in depth. There's actually more than one word in the Hebrew that's used. We see created, God created. But those are different words there. And this is bara. And bara is only used 3 times in the text of God's creation. God bara the world, created it from scratch. That means ex nihilo. God bara the great wells, and God bara man. So he created 3 things totally from scratch. The other things it says that he formed, the created verb is like he formed them. So he took what he'd already made and like breathed life into it or something like that. But these 3 verbs speak of total ex nihilo creation. So all the universe, the great wells, and man. So for some reason, God had in my mind, a special place for dinosaurs and a special display of his power. Amen. And there's Loch Ness. So God created the great sea monsters. There we go. Nessie. And I think the Leviathan is another example of a Loch Ness monster. If we look in Job 41, 1 through 10, this is the next chapter. God says to Job, can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you, or will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? Will you play with him with a bird, or will you bind him for your maidens? Will the traders bargain over him? Will they divide him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, your expectation is false. Will you be laid low even at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. So another animal in God's creation that you just don't mess with. And there we go. There's a picture of a Leviathan, an artist rendering of a Leviathan.